Hey good people, Batavia here. So I wanted to share the garden with y'all once more before it changes completely for the growing year. Well, in large part. So we have our first real cold spell coming on. Temps are going to dip down into the 20s, and I have some decisions to make about how I'm going to manage the garden. My mom has continued to ask, what's left in the garden? Is the garden done for the season? And for the first time, I'm going to have to give her a different answer. All right, let's dig in. You know, this time of year for me always feels like there's a race between the weather and the harvest. I mean, you want to give your plants every chance to grow, but you don't want to risk losing what you've spent so much time tending to. Okay, popping in real quick. I know everyone's garden is in a different place this time of year, but drop a comment and let me know what's growing in your garden as we head into the changing seasons and weather. And bonus points if you share what's the coldest you've seen a plant still flourish in. What's that plant? So we had rain overnight 2 nights ago, and I saw it in the forecast, so I took a couple of steps to help me with the harvest that's coming up. I generally follow a rule of thumb of waiting at least a day to harvest from the garden after it's rained, and that's any time of the year, you know, no matter what I'm harvesting as well, whether it's going to be peppers, tomatoes, whether I'm harvesting leafy greens, you know, or in the case of what we have ahead is going to be root crops, especially for root crops. You know, sure, we want to absolutely mitigate fungal issues, but we also want to protect what we're harvesting from damage. You know, it's a lot easier for something to be damaged if the conditions are muddy, a lot easier for, you know, those potatoes to be bruised. You know, so I have my carrot bed. What's left of it is covered with a tarp, and I have some beets and celery over here that I had covered with plastic. So this is a combination of things that I want to get out of the garden before the weather turns. And then also just some things I want to eat from the garden. You know, the carrots, I'll leave the majority of them. But something like my sweet potatoes, I have to dig those up, and I don't want the soil to be wet. I kind of feel like there are various moments in the growing season where like I'm battling chaos in the garden. And I have some tricks that I've developed over the years that kind of help me manage against it. Going into a cold front's no different. You know, it feels a little bit chaotic, especially with my planting timing. You know, there's still a lot of crops that are in the garden that could have been done some time ago, but they were still giving and I was still letting them. But what I end up doing is kind of managing things into categories, and that helps me determine what I move on first, what I manage first, what I deal with first, second, third, what I don't have to worry about at all. You know, so category 1 is going to be anything that won't really withstand a frost, let alone a freeze. So that's your heat-loving plants. Think, you know, tomatoes, peppers. I've harvested almost all of them a couple of days ago. I did a walkthrough this morning and realized I left a few on the plant. And that's the benefit of being able to do this like the week before you're expecting really cold temps. You have 1 more shot or 2 more shots or 3 more shots to go in and get things off of the plants that you still want. Basil has already been damaged by the frost. I just had like 2 plants left, and I may have a couple of leaves that I'll be able to salvage. I have my sweet potatoes that I absolutely have to dig up. Some people recommend letting them get hit by a frost, which I think the leaves may have, but I don't want to let the freeze come in, so I'm going to dig those up. They'll have mint that I need to harvest. I'm going to just cut as much as I want off of the plants. I don't think I'm going to try to overwinter it. I've brought my containers of mint indoors and other herbs, and they've done okay, but I just want to try to minimize the potential of bringing bugs in as well. Now I do have a couple of house plants that are still so pretty that I'm going to take the chance on, but for the mint, I'm not going to even move it into the garage just because the garage isn't heated, and you know, it's not going to give that much more protection once we get down to the 20s. You know, if I were to do that, it wouldn't be about continuing to harvest mint necessarily. It'd be about, you know, kind of managing the plants to overwinter them, to bring them into next year to get a head start. So generally, You know, when it comes to an herb like that, once it's done in my garden. If I still had things like okra or any type of squash, you know, summer squash, winter squash or otherwise, I would be getting that out of the garden as well. Now, category 2 is a little bit trickier. It's trickier because it can absolutely withstand a frost. These things can absolutely withstand a freeze, but how cold and for how long determines whether there's damage or not. And in some cases, the variety of the thing you're growing. So for me, I include things like lettuce, chard, things like mustards, arugula. I'm even going to toss cabbage in there. So, you know, the 20-degree temps, 29 degrees, probably be fine. You know, if we get down to 25 like it was originally forecasted, that's going to be potentially a problem for some of these. But what my plan is to harvest as much as I want over the next couple of weeks from those plants, leaving the plants in place and seeing what happens on the other side of the frost or freeze. So that's my plan there. The last category, we'll wait for the plane. All right, so the last category, if you could guess, would be my favorite. This is going to be like my do nothing category with the tips that we're going to be getting. Category 3, you know, these plants are going to be resilient. They'll hold just fine. That's my collards. That's my kale. I, for the last few seasons, haven't done anything from the level of protecting those plants. So I could add a frost blanket, like a frost cover, like I probably will do for this space, but those are still category 2s. But category 3, like 25 degrees, it's going to be just fine, even if we get that low. I'm going to be harvesting those in December, or at least that's the plan, up through December, I should say. So for those plants, I kind of leave them as is, and I treat them as annuals. Every now and again, I'll leave the plants in place, and sometimes they go dormant and return in the spring for like one harvest before they go to seed. You know, these are biennial plants. So, you know, year 1, they produce, you enjoy. Year 2, you know, they're like, I'm ready to complete the life cycle and start to produce flowers, then ultimately the seed pods and ultimately the seeds. I don't really let them get that far in the garden because I already have plans for that space, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Category 3 is going to be where it's at. If I could plant more category 3 plants every year, I'd be better off. You know, so I already have collards and kale, parsley, you know, for my herbs, but Brussels sprouts, spinach, you know, these are super hardy plants. There's some other things like claytonia and mach that I actually started indoors back in the summer, but they didn't make it. They were either dead on arrival when coming outdoors, or in the case where I actually planted out, I can't remember if it was mach. It was mach, I think. They were eaten up by the cabbage worm, so there's that. But all in all, you know, I kind of feel like this is where I am most years ahead of a cold spell, and it's okay. Timing has worked out. A couple of the hacks when it comes to covering some of these plants from the rain has worked out for me. So now I just need to kind of round third when it comes to doing what I need to do in the garden over the next day to ensure that I'm in a good place on the other side of the freeze. Okie doke, so thanks so much for spending some time with me. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to drop them below, and I look forward to seeing y'all on the next one. I'm thinking the next one's going to be the other side of the freeze.